Yeah, so you mentioned stages. Would you be able to take us through the map of these stages?
Yes. Yeah, so I describe it in one of my answers, which is actually pinned on my core profile. What are the levels of enlightenment? So I say there are no levels of enlightenment, but there are levels of dreaming.
Okay.
And those stages, they were identified in various spiritual traditions as well, in very different terms. So uh, in the ancient spiritual traditions section of my website, there's a question: what is the ego? And in this answer, I also sort of try to put together Buddhism and Hinduism and Zen Buddhism and how they describe the stages of the realization and how the identity shifts happen through it. So your readers are welcome to read it. So here I will say, I will roughly describe it. The stages actually also correspond to chakras. So the stages that I'm talking about only corresponds to the last four chakras. I mean, the first three, I don't even talk about too much. I mean, they can kind of also, there's no, in my experience, a very kind of easily identifiable shift between the lower stages or lower chakras, but between the higher stages there are quite easily identifiable shifts, which is not to say that you cannot jump back and forth or they cannot be sort of blurry, because the experience is very individual, and those stages of the realizations, even though they usually come in more or less linear fashion, because it's hard to realize some things before you realize some previous things, but they still would be more accurately described as facets of realizations rather than stages. But they do usually come in some sort of a linear fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a long prelude. I'm sorry,
I got you.
So basically, the very first stage that happens is the presence of an impersonal witness. So some people would call it the witnessing stage. Some people could call it the soul. So in the dream state, you feel that you are a person in the body looking outside the body into the physical world. So then when the impersonal witness appears, and some people would call it God, and some people would call conscience, some people would call it awareness. It really doesn't matter what you call it at all. But you feel like you're still you in some way, but there is an impersonal witness which feels truer than you.
Mm.
And so the sayings like I am infinite stillness observing my imperfect personality, or something like this, they come from this stage. So at this stage, there's usually a strong belief that the ego is needed, that you cannot survive without ego, and that this is enlightenment. Actually, at every stage, it feels like this is enlightenment, and there's nothing beyond it. And it was the same for me. So kind of the ego is very deceptive. It always doesn't want to see more of itself. It always doesn't want to disappear deeper. So it always like wants to say this is the final thing.
Uh-huh.
Just like in the dream state, you don't want to admit that there's something beyond it. So I think that this is what Osho called the spiritual body. So this is like the first authentic non-dual existence. So there's a presence of some witness. There's still a lot of ego. It's still identified with the emotions are oftentimes perceived as energy. So you stop like being a slave of society in such a profound way as you are when you're dreaming. There is some level of independence but you're still a slave of your emotional energy.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so this is where people start speaking about energies a lot. People describe themselves as empaths, so feeling other people's pain. People sort of pay a lot of attention to energies. There's still a lot of resistance to negative energies and a lot of clinging to positive energies. So depending on how much spiritual work a person has done, on the level of behavior, equanimity, lack of anger, lack of spite, good willingness, this might not be different much from the dream state. But usually what happens is the vocabulary changes.
I see.
So, there are a lot of spiritual people at this stage who speak spiritual language, but they basically describe an ordinary person when they speak about themselves. So it's like, instead of saying, I don't like you, they would say, you have negative energy. You know?
I got you.
Instead of saying, I dump you, they would say, I let you go, mm-hmm. and things like that. So there is some authentic insight. There is some understanding that there is something beyond. Yeah. There is a presence of impersonal witness. There's usually a renaming of emotions into energies, or like some people would say emotions, energy motions. There is more acceptance of those energies for sure, but it's still quite limited. And depending on a person, from a perspective of the personality, unconditional love, equanimity, and calmness, there might not be a lot of change. Now, so some people call it witnessing stage. Now, as this progresses deeper and deeper, and there is a moment of realization that pretty much everything that you thought about yourself, everything that you thought about your character, all your psychology basically is not real and it's self-created. There's a moment of deep surrender, deep release into the unknown, so to say. So this is a moment when the ego is truly disidentified with, and this is what was described historically as Chat-Sit-Ananda, truth, consciousness, bliss. So basically, at this stage, you realize that nothing you thought of yourself is true. Ego is completely untrue. Only consciousness is true. And you literally kind of become consciousness. You become loving awareness. So the sayings like, I am always here, I am you, I am love.
I see.
They come from this stage.
Like
so this
merging.
Is the I am. What?
A complete merging.
Yes. So it's not complete yet,
okay.
but at least like the ego is abandoned entirely as something that you identified with. So there's usually a tremendous release of bliss. There's a very deep stage of equanimity. The resistance to experience becomes even lighter, and more importantly, your main identity becomes consciousness, love, being. Right. So this is I would describe it as the I am stage. So whereas the previous stage is basically just a presence of something that points you to the beyond, or some people would call the higher self. At this stage, you literally become the higher self. So whereas the previous stage is sort of continuing your life as an ego, but with a presence of impersonal witness, here you are becoming life itself. You're becoming love itself. You're becoming life itself. So from the ultimate perspective, what's going on in this stage is it's basically the appreciation of the beauty and the bliss of life. So that's not all, actually, because after the beauty, the appreciation of the beauty and the bliss and the pleasurableness of life, after becoming life itself, after appreciating the unity with life, you also have to appreciate the emptiness and finality of death. And so at this stage, at the I am stage, the identity is sort of present and rooted here. So you always hear, I am here, right now, the consciousness. But there's no consciousness in death. So the appreciation of death, not actual dying, the body lives through this process just fine. So just feed it, let it sleep, and it's going to live through the process just fine. If you don't do anything to the body, it's going to thank you for it. It's going to flower. It's going to become more healthy. It's all happening in the mind. So the appreciation of the emptiness of death is when you realize that you don't exist. So I would call the I'm not stage. So this is where people start saying that I am nothing.
Yeah.
I am eternity. I'm not here.
Mm-hmm.
So the identity moves to something which is almost impossible to describe. So some people describe it as transcendental awareness. So it's not here. It's not even here. So you're looking at death at this stage. You're looking at your final destiny. So whereas previously you were here and you were here very, very deeply, you stopped being here. So it's a stage of being consumed by the void. It's the stage of being consumed by emptiness. So it's a very deep appreciation of the emptiness of life, of its meaninglessness, and of the finality of death for you. So
it's like goes from yin to yang.
Yeah. I mean, this usually comes after. I mean, it always pretty much like it comes after the I am, because it's actually more difficult. It's rarer. It's more painful. There's more fear there. Then finally you can say that there is a stage, and it's described in Tibetan Buddhism, for example, is when those things merge together. When you realize that being and non-being are one, and they cannot be separated.
Yeah.
So sometimes they described as neither being nor non-being. Sometimes it describes as neither perception nor non-perception. It was described as the birthplace of Buddhas. Also, although technically you can't even describe the I'm not stage as Buddhahood, but you seriously cannot describe the I am stage as Buddhahood, because this is, I would say, like, this is the birthplace of bodhisattvas and arhats, but not Buddhas. There's usually, not usually, always, there's a lot of suffering between the I am and I'm not.
Yeah.
So you can describe it as sainthood. This is the place that Jesus Christ taught from, but there's still a lot of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So some, I don't remember who, maybe Maharaji, maybe, no. Oh, Maharaj, probably. So I don't remember who said this quote. So he said, love tells me that I'm everything. Wisdom tells me that I'm nothing. In between those two, my life flows. So he was talking about that.
Yeah, that was Nisargadatta.
Yeah, well, yes, thank you. That's him. Yes. So he was talking about this stage. So beyond I'm not, beyond I am, beyond I'm not, and I am and I'm not. I'm neither.
Yeah. So
ultimately, this just means that if you actually translate it into common language, right? You can talk about these things in very, very spiritual ways, but you can also talk about these things in very common language. You can basically say all this means is I'll be dead, but right now I'm alive. And it's in a sort of a very, very deep appreciation and integration of both is what gives rise to this I neither being nor non-being.
Yeah. Wow.
So ultimately, it's still quite esoteric, and the return to the body isn't complete yet. So ultimately, you return to the body to such a full extent that neither this beautiful, blissful identity of the ever-present consciousness in I'm not, neither this mystical, very untouchable, transcendental identity in a, well, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I meant to say I am. So neither this mystical transcendental identity in I'm not are no longer present, and the only true identity is actually your body. So you come back to your body in a very, very ordinary, common, profoundly ordinary way, and you realize yourself as the body, because all of the stages actually happen in the mind. So strictly speaking, enlightenment is a very interesting journey. It's a journey. When you begin this journey, you inhabit the mind, literally. So the thing that you think you are when you're beginning this journey only exists in the mind. It doesn't exist in reality. It doesn't mean your body doesn't exist. We love to confuse ego with the body. We think, a lot of spiritual people think the ego is the body. The ego is not the body at all. But it's an identity that lives in the mind, and it thinks that it lives. It actually doesn't at all. So enlightenment is a journey from inhabiting the mind through the mind. So first the mind makes realization. There's consciousness. This thoughts that just exist in the mind. So it's a journey from the mind, through the mind, then through the heart. So through the layers of emotional suppression, through the layers of suffering, through compassion, through fear, through emotional pain, and all the self-denials, and so from the mind, through the heart, back to the body. So from my perspective, I am the body, and that's all I am.
Wow. Jeez, man, that was too good.
It makes you indistinguishable with any other living being. So like from my perspective, when I look at a squirrel or I look at any animal, I don't see them any different at all, right? So maybe like I have a slightly bigger brain, but 2 legs, 2 arms, they get cold, they get hungry, they experience pain just like me. They're alive just like me. They're gonna die just like me. So the love of enlightenment, it starts with you. It starts with yourself. Then it grows to include all people, and then it grows to include all life, all living beings. Because ultimately there is no difference.
Yeah. Wow. Which is really just love for yourself.
What?
It's really just love for yourself.
Yes. Yes. And love for yourself allows it all to happen because it's true, and it's always been true.
Yeah.
So I also often like to make this point that how to tell between an authentic realization and just some weird idea, some hallucination. They can appear to be true in meditation or in psychedelic trips. The authentic insight, it always has the flavor of, I've always known this. It's always been true. It's always been like that. Always. I was just lying to myself. I was just pretending. I was just in denial. It never has a flavor of, I went to some realm and I found something out. I went to some realm and I was told. No, it always has the flavor of, I have always known it. I just didn't want to admit it. I was just in denial.
Yeah, it's like an aha.
And it comes, and it's applicable to authentic to insights about the nature of existence, the sort of philosophical things that we're talking about, life, death, as much as about thousands of insights that you will have on this path about your psyche, about how you were and why you were this way. And about all the other people, like for example, that you realize that you've only been chasing very beautiful women because you were insecure and you wanted to prove something to yourself. It's also gonna have a flavor of, I've always known this. I've always suspected this. It's always been true.
Yeah.
And just like you realize that some of the people that you thought you were friends were never really, and they were just using you. to boost their ego, for example. It will always feel like I've always known this. I just really didn't want to admit it. So all authentic insights, they have this flavor of remembrance. So enlightenment is a remembrance.
Yeah, that's good, man. Whew, it's like a eureka moment.
Yes.
Constant
Yes.
eureka.
The moment of remembering. Yes.
Yeah.
It's a path of abandoning lies, abandoning pretense, abandoning denials, abandoning deceit, and coming back to what you have always known, coming back to truth.
Going back home.
And experientially, it feels like, from the mind through the heart and back to the body. But on the level of the mind, on the level of the understanding, which you can express in words, just like I'm doing it now, it feels like every insight is a remembering.
Wow. It's a constant remembrance.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.